I have learned from making TikToks that I'm just not going to make content unless it's on my iPhone, so welcome to my iPhone 12. And today we are going to talk about how you get funded as a seed stage company, or in other words, like what do VCs look for in seed stage companies. I have talked to hundreds of them, and they all give the same answer, which is some variation of these three factors. Might be one of the three, might be two of the three, depends on their strategy, but it is always these three things. So the first thing that absolutely everyone's going to look at is the people, aka the team, and in particular the co-founding team. But what does that really mean? I would say that the vast majority of VCs invest on essentially pattern matching to things that they've seen in the past. So for example, when I was a VC, I ran data on all of the successful companies, what type of founders founded those types of companies, and then broke it down by sector so that I could pattern match by sector. So for example, for enterprise founders, it is often that those who really succeeded were ones who were experienced operators with like 7+ years in that industry, or second-time founders in that industry, while for fintech founders, a lot more of them came from financial services without per se having a technical background, because fintech actually is often very financial services as opposed to like tech engineering heavy. While with like consumer founders, you often saw first-time founders succeed as opposed to second-time founders, because the like weird young ones who are trying new distribution channels often are able to find cool, cheap new distribution channels, which allowed their consumer company to be successful. All of which is to say, I think the question here is a little bit of pattern matching to, hey, are you believable as a founder, as a founding pair to succeed in this sector? My notes are here. Okay, the second thing is, do you have a story that makes sense and connects to what you are trying to build? I'm of the belief that it is very, very difficult to have insight unless you have been in it. Like, you can have insight from being within a world. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to have insight in a market from the outside. So for example, if you are a founder whose family has been running like pizza shops forever, then I believe you have insight in how pizza shops run, or maybe how restaurants run, or how small businesses run payroll, etc. But essentially having that story that really ties to what you are building adds a lot, or something that I think people really consider. A third thing that people, I think the good VCs do consider, is how legitimate is the co-founder pair connection, because it is absolutely the number one thing that will kill you. You're not going to run out of money first, you're going to run out of motivation first, and one of the reasons, among many, that you might run out of motivation is because you actually don't like working with your co-founder. And so it's actually very difficult for a VC to gauge this, but they can, for example, figure out if you've worked together on a company before, if you've worked together on a project before and how that went, or people from that time, how did they find your dynamic? They can go to your office and then talk to some of your employees and try to gauge how you guys make decisions, stuff like that. So I would say that is the third thing that people who invest based on the team often consider. And then finally, this is actually true of everything in terms of what VCs look for, but they really look for exceptionalness or pointiness, even more so than well-roundedness. So it's not per se a bad thing. In fact, it's very uncommon to find a team who has like absolutely everything, especially not in two co-founders, but they love an exceptionalness. So for example, let's say like a young kid who's very precocious, who sold his first company in high school, or someone who was like an ex-athlete and she was a ballerina and now she's starting like a crypto trading company or something like that. So the second category that VCs will spend a lot of time in is market. Some people are more people-based investors, some people are more market-based investors. What I mean by that is people-based investors kind of shoot from the hip based on like how they feel about people, while market-based investors understand a market really well, know where a gap might be, and then when they see someone filling that gap, they find it more believable or are more interested in investing. So when it comes to market-based investing, the number one thing I would say for you as a founder is do not try to convince a VC of something that they don't believe in. This is actually pretty good general life advice. You just don't have the ability, and more importantly, you don't have the time to convince someone who does not already kind of buy into what you're believing in. More often than not, the challenge of trying to get funding is finding someone who sees the world the way you do and then believes in your thesis, obviously believes in the team, but already has to believe in the market. But when it comes to market, let's talk about some of the qualities of the market that a VC cares about. By the way, this is very difficult for a VC to determine because, markets grow, markets shrink, but they will look at, for example, market size and market depth. Why does that matter? Because a question VCs do ask is, if this founder is correct about their hypothesis, does that matter? All of which is to say, is it consequential? Because startups are about exceptionalness. I really cannot emphasize this enough, that in order for startup math to work, the business has to not just be a good 10 million, 100 million revenue business. It has to be an outlier, like a true exception. Which is why if you don't have a big enough or deep enough market, particularly 10 years down the road when an early stage VC is trying to exit this position that they have in your company, then it doesn't even matter if you're an amazing executor, because it wasn't consequential from the scope and scale that a large VC or a VC would care about. So that is why they think about market size and market depth. And then I think it's very important, this question of, should this be a venture-backed company and hence a startup, or is this just a business? This is something my partners and I would talk about all the time. And in order to evaluate this, we would often look at the qualities of a market. I think something that founders love to come in and say is hey, this is a fragmented market, but we're going to do something different, and hence we're going to build a really big company in this space. There might be a reason why it's a fragmented market. For example, painting or painting, is a very fragmented market, and part of the reason for that is because it has low barriers to entry. If I'm a good painter or my cousin's a good painter, they can start a painting business. As a result of that, you can build large businesses in this space, but it's going to be hard to build a startup where the market narrows and you have a leader and then you have high barriers to entry, such that this company gets an outsized multiple, which is really how VCs make their money, on these outsized multiples when a company goes public or exits. So that is something that they would look for. Is this market fragmented? And if so, is there a reason why this market is fragmented? The opposite question might be, is there a giant market leader that is probably going to continue compounding? We all love an underdog story, but there's a reason why we love them. It's because it's unlikely and it's uncommon. So an example of this is, let's say you have a company in the space, they're worse of all, they're actually a startup, and the founder has continued to be at the helm of the company, and they are very motivated. That company is probably going to compound its advantages, and a VC is going to be less willing to believe that you, rando, are going to beat out this company where the founder still cares, they're compounding their advantages, and they have a lot of resources. And that might not be true, but I'm saying this is what a VC thinks about. So the last part that I'm going to talk about is product/traction. Now, first thing I want to say about this is that it really depends on literally where the market currently is. I mean, for VCs and for startups. So, for example, if all the seed stage companies have $1 million in revenue, then the 90th percentile, which is kind of what VCs are looking for, exceptionalness or outliers, means that you have to have more than $1 million revenue to be exceptional in their eyes. But if the market has a lot of capital in it and you just have a bunch of founders starting companies for the first time, then there might not be as much of a traction requirement. All of which is to say, how much of a traction requirement there is really depends on where the market currently is, and you should just ask your VC friend who's currently investing in your space, maybe what does great look like right now for a seed stage company. Anyways, second thing I want to say is, why does product/traction matter? You are building a relationship with the VC as a VC is building a relationship with you that's going to be very long term, and they are trying to figure out if you are believable. Is it believable that these two people with a Notion doc can do something very difficult? First of all, figure out revenue generation, then figure out servicing revenue, and can you do it at startup scale where you're going to grow super fast? One of the many ways to make yourself seem more believable, if the product is really great, because then you can see the product and you're like, wow, that founder actually has taste, or wow, I understand that there's a problem in the market and the founder has come up with a clever solution. It brings into focus reality. Same thing with traction. Who cares like what a VC thinks about your product? If you have amazing companies in your industry in terms of buyers that are buying your product and they have good retention and they're willing to do pilots with you, then it clearly seems like you might be onto something. That is why, especially depending on the market, VCs will care a lot about product or traction. So the very last thing I want to say about this topic is, yes, I really do think that this is what VCs look at in terms of seed stage companies. Every single one that I've talked to, they say, I'm a people-based investor, like based on these parameters I talked about. I'm a market-based investor, a problem-based investor, or there's some combination of these three, and depending on sort of where the market is, they tend to like invest in certain companies or not. But what I really want to emphasize is that you should absolutely not run your company to please a VC in any way, shape, or form. A VC is not your buyer. They might be important because they provide your ability to live, because they fund you and like fund your salary and fund your engineer salaries, et cetera, et cetera. And so it is maybe some signal, but it is not real signal. Real signal is whether you are onto something where people are willing to pay you money, you are capable of servicing that revenue, particularly with technology or with something that is scalable, and you have the capacity to execute really quickly to get to eventually a market that is consequential and will be an outlier outcome. These are things you actually need to think about, not what VCs care about. With that being said, I understand that the impression that you leave on VCs is important, and that's why I made this video. Anyways, if you want to see more videos of me sitting on the floor until I figure out like a chair and like a tripod situation, feel free to subscribe. I'll just be talking about business and tech, my favorite random topics.